Hi folks, this is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report. I want to tell you about a bait that I don't talk about much. And I was watching a couple of the TV shows over the last month, and they were showing how in cold water, in cold weather, a suspending jerkbait can really work well. Well, what is a suspending jerkbait? You know, for decades, one of the best plugs, we called them plugs before, that you could use was a Rapala. And they make long, skinny ones with a little lip in front. And as they go through the water, they look like a long fish swimming in the water. Well, most of the original Rapalas were floating baits. Most of the plastic jigs, hard plastic baits were floating. Now they make some so that they'll sink naturally down. And these suspending jerk baits that I'm talking about, baits that are 3 to 5 inches long, maybe 6 inches long, are long, slender, have a short lip in front of them, but they will naturally, if you cast them out and give them a few seconds, they will start to sink down. Then they'll reach a certain point. You start to reel them in. They'll stay at that point. They'll stay at that depth. They won't float back up to the surface. So what's the advantage of that? Well, if that depth is a good depth where those fish are reacting, then if it stays there and the water's really cold, like it still is right now, you can stop it. You can reel it a few feet, stop it. It'll just suspend right there. It won't move. Then you twitch the rod tip. The bait will jerk from side to side. It'll look just like something wounded. And then if a fish is watching it, but they're not real eager, they're cold, they don't want to follow, they don't want to swim fast, they'll watch. And eventually, if you do this a few times, that bait becomes irresistible to those fish. And it actually does. I've seen so many times where this has been the case. Well, the second day that I just went fishing for pike, I had been using my favorite bait and nothing. And I was fishing with my buddy Rust. And I thought, well, I'm going to put on one of these suspended jerk baits. And I'm going to see what happens. I chose one that was in like a shiner color. It wasn't a perch color. It was a sort of a silver and white. And it was about 4 inches long. So I threw it out, reeled it down a bit. Now, remember, we had already fished this whole area and hadn't had a strike. And on my second cast, bam, I hooked a really nice pike. It was 29 inches long. How do I know how long it was? Because what happened, because this suspended jerkbait had treble hooks, and it had 2 batches of these small hooks, and that pike wanted that so badly that it sucked it right in on the strike. When it just sucked that bait in, tried to swallow it in all one motion, I guess. And so the hooks were hooked deeply. I couldn't save the fish. I ended up keeping it, and that's how I know it was 29 inches. Well, I finally got the hooks out. I cast again, and bam, the same thing happens again. The fish really wanted this bait, but when you're using something like that with a number of treble hooks on it, it makes it so much more difficult for us to try to get the hook out of the fish, and second, for the fish, if we want that fish to live, to be able to survive potential internal damage. Because if those little trebles get into the gills, or if they get down into the stomach lining, it can be really hard for that fish to survive. So, are these suspended jerk baits deadly? You bet. In the right type of conditions, they can probably be your best offering. And again, there's a lot of wonderful baits that I don't use anymore because most of my fishing is for catch and release. And if I'm going to be able to safely release those fish, I got to do as little damage as possible, and that's where single hooks really come into play. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report.